delighted to have with us Galoppin, who's joining us from outside of Brussels in Belgium today, to talk a little bit about the concept of social architecture and how to facilitate change through community. Hi, Luc. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Excellent. So perhaps we can get started right away, and you could give us a bit of a sense for this idea of leading change through community. What is your thinking in terms of how practitioners can really use that as an approach to facilitating change?
Yeah, I would like to start talking about where I got the idea from. My background is that I am active for 15 years now on projects related to big IT changes, and that's where I discovered the fact that when you push a project into an organization, a project that you developed on an island, and you want to push it into an organization where it results into big change, not only in the way that systems are managed, but in the ways that people will have to work from now on, that it is better to do it together with people and not against people. So that's the basis of the idea. And then I started to discover that when we start to look at an organization not only as a flatland where you can see the hierarchy of an organization and how the relations are supposed to be in reporting lines, but we can discover different layers, and the project could be one layer on top of that flatland organization. When we start to manage roles and hand out different t-shirts or different caps of people that they can have next to their positional function, that's when you get stuff going. That's when you can hand out accountabilities, and people will find themselves being responsible for things they're supposed to do within the context of a project. So the context of a project represents one extra layer, and then on top of that organizational layer we can discover a multitude of layers. And what I discovered is that the dynamics is not so much a dynamic of authority to which we are used in a normal flatland organization, but there is another dynamic at play which is much more forceful, and it's a dynamic of influence, which is more tribal based instead of authority based. So we have two mechanisms that almost are competing with one another, and then the idea started to grow inside of me, saying it shouldn't have to be a competition. Both mechanisms need each other. We need both authority and influence. We need both compliance and community. Those two dynamics can go hand in hand.
So that is all very helpful context. Perhaps you can tell us a little bit more about this concept that you have that I find quite intriguing, of working on the white space between the boxes in an organizational chart.
Exactly. When we look at an organizational chart, what we tend to see only is the boxes and the reporting lines. And our first interpretation is that this is how an organization is supposed to work. This is how an organization is supposed to reach results. When you ask the question, well, how exactly, what is the most important position on this chart to reach results? Different types of answers we always get. Either it's the person on top, either it's the middle management, either it is the people who are in the front line doing the execution work. Thing is, it is a trick question, because how an organization actually reaches results is through the white space in between the boxes and the reporting lines. And with that, I mean that when you have a project, when you have a result you're striving for, it's mostly a combination of people who informally either know one another or connect above and beyond the reporting lines and the boxes that are there. And when we start to see those dynamics, we can start to discern different layers that are built up out of different necessities, different results you want to reach, and those gather in different tribes. So that layeredness of an organization, that three-dimensional view of an organization, is what we call social architecture. Or one step beyond that is being intentional about those layers. And when we look into the science of community management, we start to discover that there's a lot of grips and handles that we can use. There is a toolbox that is ready to use in order to influence or in order to organize our interventions into the community aspects of an organization.
Wow. This is a very, very helpful insight, and one that often, I think as practitioners, we just don't have visibility to, because we're used to a culture of looking at those people in the boxes, if you like, in an organizational hierarchy, and an emphasis, for example, on sponsors.
Yes.
So just building on that insight, can you give us a sense as to how you've been able to actually work through community and advance some of these social architecture principles working on an assignment? What does that look like for you in practice?
Well, I want to give you two examples. First example is from a very rigid SAP implementation, which was a rollout throughout different countries in Europe. It was a logistic project where we had a lot of trouble with the speed of the label printers, and that affected the speed of shipping, which had as a very concrete result that there are a lot of lorry drivers, truck drivers lining up at the gate. They also have their deadlines to meet. They also have their deliveries to perform. And when that stupid label printer is not printing fast enough, we're having a problem. So we connect to headquarters in Switzerland. That was the case, in order to find out more about the printer. The answer was plain and simple: no, printer works fine. You do your job better. But when we connected to all the other sites and all the other countries that have had these rollouts before, that's when we start to connect with people who had the same badge, the badge of person who is responsible for that label printer, and they connected on in a way that was not described by the organization chart, but by permission of that badge they were wearing. This is the problem I'm trying to solve. By that permission solely, they tinkered with the situation. They found a solution for that specific label printer. That's how they got it solved. And that's when we started to see different communities based on a badge that someone is wearing. So overarching different rollouts, and we created the layer. That's the first example. Second example is an example of a more societal level. When we are in a healthcare situation, I think Canada and Belgium is comparable with regards to healthcare benefits and healthcare protection. The insight that a patient does not heal from a system alone, even though we have a very well working system of social benefits, social security, healthcare system. We don't have to pay too much for our healthcare. A patient does not heal from that system alone. On top of that, we have the help of patients who are in the same situation, from our family, from a school system if it's about a chronically ill child, from psychologists and from other people. All those people, they form together a fabric which I call 1,000 hands. And those are different layers. On top of that very necessary layer of service, we have layers of care. And care is something that cannot be provided by that basic ground layer of an organization or of a society. So we need both service and care. We need both compliance and community. We need both authority and influence. And that insight, that balance that we desperately need between those two systems, that is called social architecture. It's not either or, it's an upgrade. It's an end game. A-N-D.
Yes, that is beautifully put, and reminds me of one of our great Canadian thinkers, Henry Mintzberg's call for a balanced society. And I think very much some of these same ideas of balancing influence and authority, structure, and community. So that is, I think, a very important, worthwhile conversation to have.
Yeah. Well, now that you mentioned, sorry to interrupt you, but now that you mentioned Mintzberg, he also makes a very clear difference between a network and a community. A network is something that has no specific commitment or accountability to it. It's a possibility for exchanging information. When we take the step towards a community, there is an aspect of accountability and an aspect of choice, being there by choice. And when those commitments are taken, when you have a tight network with commitments, with accountability, that makes a difference between a network and a community. So that's a thing I'm still working on, is really carving out the difference between a network and a community. Because sometimes when I talk about community, people say, oh yeah, I get it. We have that, we have a network. And that's when I have to say, no. There's the aspect of accountability and legitimacy that is also necessary, that marks the difference between the two.
Absolutely. I think that is a very useful distinction for us to keep in mind. So perhaps just to wrap up, I'll ask you one last question, if I may, which would be, if you had one main piece of advice for practitioners interested in really raising their game and using this concept of community and social architecture in their work, what would you suggest?
It would be twofold. First of all, is to look at the capacity that is already there, because often we think about, I have to create a tribe, I have to create a community, and more often than it is not the case, those communities exist already, but it's a way of looking differently at what is there already. So the basic emphasis I would like to stress here is that the capacity that is needed to build a community or to develop a community is already present there. So look for what is already present there and try to see it with a different lens or with a different pair of glasses.
Excellent. That is a very useful and practical insight. Listen, Rick, I really want to thank you for taking the time out to participate. It's been a real pleasure to chat, and we'll look forward to continuing the conversation online and through your writings, which I think are just a huge contribution to the community. So thanks so much.
My pleasure. And if anybody wants to reach out to me for further comments or information, I'd be glad to help.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Dick.